Indeed, there are many people in the world today, they're well known as jihadists, Muslim fundamentalists, people who want to kill, really do seriously want and intend to kill everyone in this room, who get the energy they've got and are willing to give their lives because they are so sure that God is with them. And if you want to believe that God intervenes on one side or another and that God takes a hand in human history and human affairs, you have to grant it to them too. I don't know whether you're ready to do that, or you'd have to say, no, it's only true when we say so, which I think would be, wouldn't it, a rather unsatisfying argument. It's reckoned by the National Geographic, I recommend you look this up, that the human species was down to less than 2,000 or 3,000 people at that point. And if it had not made this move, would have gone the way of, mark this figure, would have gone the way of 99.8%. 99.8% of all other species that have ever existed on this planet and gone extinct. Now, I just rub that in once more. 99.8% of all the forms of life ever to appear on this terrestrial globe are gone, wiped out. And it was nearly us. And this doesn't, to me, give the evidence of a design, of the finger of a god of any kind, let alone one who wishes us well. It rather suggests to me that nature and the world and human life are a struggle. Why is it not a good thing? Because I don't think it's healthy for people to want there to be a permanent, unalterable, irremovable authority over them. I don't like the idea of a father who never goes away. And nor do you, if you think about it. When you get closer to parenthood, you won't say to your children, don't worry, I'll never die. You won't be at my funeral, I'll be at yours. I'll be at your grandchildren's funeral. You'll never hear the end of me. That's actually not loving paternity. The idea of a king who cannot be deposed, very un-American idea as well as a very undemocratic one. The idea of a judge who doesn't allow a lawyer or a jury or an appeal. This is an appeal to absolutism. It's the part of ourselves that's not so nice, that wants security, that wants certainty, that wants to be taken care of. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the human struggle for freedom was against the worst kind of dictatorship of all, the theocracy, the one that claims it has God on its side, the divine right of kings, the feudal system, the monarchical one against which the American Revolution, with its secular humanism, took place. I believe the totalitarian temptation has to be resisted, and I believe this is one of its core and origin points. And so what I'm inviting you to do is to consider emancipating yourself from the idea that you, selfishly, are the sole object of all the wonders of the cosmos and of nature, because that's not a humble idea at all. It's a very arrogant one, and there's no evidence for it. You do better to emancipate yourself from it and do some real study of genetics and biology and cosmology. And then, again, a second emancipation, to think of yourselves as free citizens who are not in thrall to any supernatural, eternal authority, which you will always find is interpreted for you by other mammals who claim to have access to this authority that gives them special power over you. Don't allow yourselves to have your lives run like that. An atheist does not have to be an evolutionist. Atheism long predates the discoveries. Atheism long predates the revolutionary discoveries of Charles Darwin. If I told you that in parts of Africa where elephants are shot for their tusks, elephants are growing shorter tusks in reaction, you would, I'm sure, laugh. How would the elephant know how to do that? Elephant sees hunter, works out hunter wants tusk, is an ivory hunter, shrinks tusks to minimize chance of being shot. Don't be ridiculous. Well, no, that isn't, of course, what happens. What happens is the ones with long tusks get shot quite a lot. And the ones with shorter or no tusks have, therefore, greatly enhanced opportunities of being the ones who survive and breed. And their descendants actually have shorter or no tusks. That's what adaptability is. That's what evolution is. It's not some kind of trick. The archaeologists of the State of Israel, after the 1967 war, when Israel became, for many years, the possessor of the Sinai Peninsula, it's now given it back, and of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the biblical territories, had an unprecedented opportunity to show that the Bible story was archaeologically provable. And they were told by the founding leader of the State of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, go out, dig, find, he said, dig up the title deeds of our state. They had the strongest motive and the greatest opportunity any archaeologists have ever had. And the standard of Israeli archaeology is already extremely high, as you can tell from their national museums and the work of many great archaeologists such as Professor Finkelstein. And they had many years to do it. They couldn't find a single trace of anything that was remotely compatible with the story of the Exodus, the wandering, and the conquest of Canaan. Not one trace. On the other hand, what they could find, with the help of Egyptian archives, was enormous evidence in the opposite direction. Digging Up History is the book. It's very easy to get, very easy to read. It's a very impressive demonstration of what I call, and this is what to look for when you're looking for intellectual honesty in life, evidence against interest. In other words, people will say, I really wished, I really hoped I could find this. This was my ambition. Here is how. It wasn't compatible, wasn't doable in the light of the facts. I regard that as a very impressive piece of objective work on the part of Israeli scholarship. There's no evidence that Socrates existed either. It's not conclusive. That's to say, we only have, as we have in the case of Jesus, second-hand eyewitness reports of him. They're pretty persuasive, but they're not conclusive. He never wrote anything down, neither did Jesus. The stories about him are much more compatible than the ones of Jesus. The four Gospels contradict each other about everything from his birth, the circumstances of it, the flight into Egypt, very crucially, in all four cases, on the crucifixion and the resurrection. Just read them for yourselves. I'm sure you must have read them by now. The discrepancies are extraordinary. They don't amount to a historical figure in the same way as we know from coinage, from building, from parchments, not parchments, but from documents, tablets, things, that Alexander the Great, for example, was a historical figure. When the last outbreak of flu virus occurred, because we know something about the genetic things we have in common with bacteria and viruses, and we were able to sequence the DNA of the last such virus in 1919, didn't take us very long to get a vaccine that could prevent the last flu from being as bad as the previous one. It works. It works. You can make sound medical predictions based on it. Medicine's impossible without the work of evolution and genetics. And you should be grateful for it. But it doesn't mean there's no God. It just means that we have what we think are better explanations for our human nature. Where's the need for faith in that case? If it can be proved in the same way as a proposition of mine has to be proved or has to fall, what need for faith? What need for the suffering, the struggle to achieve faith and maintain it? There'd be no need for faith if there really was evidence, would there? I'd love to know how you bridge this gap. Another reason why I would steer very clear of this idea of making God responsible, not just for our existence, but for our behavior and for what happens to us, is it dooms you to have to keep on pestering him with plaintive questions that don't have an answer. Things like war and pestilence come because we are not very highly evolved animals who live on a rather climatically unstable planet and don't know very much yet about our circumstances. The way that we behave to each other is recognizable from the way that other animals behave to each other, unfortunately, but we have one very clear idea, and it's fortunately one that it's almost impossible for us to get rid of, that if we don't act responsibly to one another, whether for altruistic reasons or not, the motives don't necessarily have to be pure, but if we didn't have a social dimension, a bonding one, we wouldn't survive. We'd have gone by now. We wouldn't have made it out of Africa. The question, in a sense, answers itself. Now, you can call this morality if you want, and there certainly are some individuals who act in what appears to us to be a self-sacrificing way, and they've always got tremendous honor in all tribes, in all societies, and at all times. But it's only really necessary to recognize that we have a kinship and a solidarity, and that without it we're gone. Morality cannot be dictated to us. It doesn't come in tablet form that can be swallowed. It comes from the Socratic method of moral suasion, long reflection. Why should this be called wrong? Why would this be a dishonor? Otherwise, why do the Ten Commandments say nothing about slavery, nothing about genocide, nothing about child abuse, nothing about innumerable other things that preoccupy us and make us think, of which we think us evil, and about 4 instructions on how to worship a very jealous, capricious, and ill-tempered God? Why do people get pleasure from doing things that aren't necessarily in their interest, just for the sake of other people? I hope no one in this room hasn't had that feeling at a certain point. And it's very nice that we have it, along with all our predatory and selfish and other survival necessary attributes. I think my favorite example is that of giving blood. I like giving blood. I like the feeling that I'm giving someone else a life-giving fluid. I am giving it. I'm also not losing it. It doesn't take very long to replenish a pint of blood, so it's a really wonderful gift relationship to have. You haven't lost a pint, but you've given one. So there's no need for any sort of feel-good or self-congratulation about it. You haven't really made a big sacrifice, but you've taken a little time, you've thought about other people. And then I have a very, very rare blood group, and I'm very anxious that there be enough blood when it's my turn. So there's every interest in the good feeling that I have, the warm feeling that I have, being one that evolution has given me for my sake and for everybody else's. I don't think there's anything very mysterious about that, do you? And of course there are a lot of people who don't care about others at all. We call them sociopaths. And the design apparently also makes quite a lot of psychopaths, people who can only be happy, making other people unhappy. These are all children of God as well, according to you. It's not my problem. That's exactly what you would expect from the imperfectly evolved primate species. No mysteries there. Nothing to explain, nothing to call on God about. Why did you allow Hitler? We know where Hitler comes from. There's no, the principle of Occam's razor in logic and philosophy. Keep it by you at all times. Don't make mysteries where none exist. Don't increase the number of unnecessary and complex questions. Very important principle. It's death to religion, that principle. Only a few verses later than the Ten Commandments, God instructs the children of Israel to kill everyone of the other tribe, the Amalekites, the Midianites, everybody, all the men, all the children, and to leave only the marriageable women alive. That is an instruction that's very frequently repeated, by the way, and invariably carried out. When Thomas Paine pointed that out in The Age of Reason a couple of centuries ago, there was a Welsh bishop who wrote in, complaining to him, saying, "The Bible does not say those women were kept for immoral purposes." You're free to believe that if you wish. If you're going to bring up rape and evolution and the way that humanity actually behaves, under divine instruction, I'm pointing out here, you must stop saying what I meant to correct you from saying earlier, that what I attack is what people do in the name of religion. No, they don't mistake religion when they obey commandments like this. What I object to is what's in the original instructions. And these are instructions for rape, genocide, and slavery. They are instruction manuals for it. And also, how to behave like a slave yourself. Well, you've just said that God makes a human species, takes a brief look at it and decides it's in rebellion against me. It doesn't know how it's done this, but that's his verdict. You're in rebellion against me. For one thing, you've broken the rule I gave you, don't think for yourselves. You deliberately went and looked for knowledge. Now you're in rebellion. Now you're going to suffer. Now there's nothing that won't happen to you. I made you and I can break you. And I will. I'll flood you, I'll plague you. Now, what is this? This is like being a terrible insect or rodent in the laboratory of a cruel and stupid person. And what is more nihilistic? What's more nihilistic and alienating than that? It's all summarized in one line, if you wish. To believe what Dr. Dembski believes and his co-thinkers believe, you have to consider yourself created incurably sick and then ordered on pain of death and eternal torture to be well. This is not morality. In the early Christian years, there were many leaders of the early church who thought that Christianity should be a new religion, which it's not, unfortunately, for you. And the reason it'll never triumph is because it insists on shackling itself to the terrible books of the Jewish Old Testament. Now, great Christian thinkers like Marcion was the best known. There were Marcionite churches all over the Middle East, just for the study and worship of the message of the Nazarene. But it was decided no. The whole Nazarene story had to reverse engineer and prove the truth of the Old Testament books as well. And with this insufferable burden, you've saddled yourself with an unbelievable and wicked religion. The torture and human sacrifice of somebody, which if I'd been present, it would have been my duty to try and prevent, which I did not ask for, over which I have no control, that took place thousands of years, according to some, before I was born, commits me, and that I have no choice in the matter, and that my sins are forgiven by this human sacrifice. Now, what's wrong with that? If I like you enough or love you enough, I can pay your debt. I say there was folly on your part, but I'll pay it for you. In extreme cases, people have been known to volunteer to take other people's place in prison, or even, one or two very famous cases, on the scaffold. They'll say, I'll do that for you. I'll do it for love, or I'll do it for suffering humanity. But that's the most they can do. And it's not bad. What they can't do is take away your sins, because that would be to take away your responsibility. I can't say you didn't steal or lose that money that I'm having to pay now. I can't say that this course of folly didn't get you into prison. It did. And now look what you're doing to me. I can't relieve you of that. I can't wash you white as snow and make you new again. It's more than can be promised and more than should be promised. Vicarious redemption is scapegoating. It's throwing your sins onto an animal. It's an old primitive practice from the Middle East. It doesn't deserve the attention of civilized or thoughtful people. So anyway, it's pervert. Let's admit, it's kindly offered to me. I give all these objections. I think it's highly implausible. I don't really believe the story. I didn't ask for it, and having considered it, I would rather carry on living, trying to lead a decent life without it. Okay, thanks. But thanks for asking. Oh no, sorry, you didn't hear us right the first time. It wasn't an offer. You refuse it on pain of death. Excuse me, I won't be talked to in that tone of voice. Something about me. I hope something about some of you too. What was that? I'm not free to refuse this offer? You're making me an offer I can't decline. Was that a threat? Are you saying that if I turn away from this lamb's blood, from which I'm supposed to be washed, and say I don't think it will clean me, say, well, that means an eternity of torture, you know. I hope you better take that into account before you consider our offer of eternal love. No, no, no. This is North Korea. This is celestial dictatorship. This is the worship that only a slave could take part in. Now that we've discovered that Edwin Hubble's red light shift, showing the speed and rate of the expansion of the universe, the way in which it's flying apart, that, as I said earlier, that speed and rate, this was only found out a decade ago, is increasing all the time, completely contradicting everything we thought before. We're flying apart faster than we thought. A lot of nothingness is coming our way. Now, what design is that a part of, is what you have to ask yourself. Of what design, let alone of what benign design, could that conceivably be a part? This fantastic waste of energy, this gigantic profusion. Again, it makes God such a tinkerer and such a profligate, just as 99.8% of every species created on Earth since it started has been dispensed with, has gone extinct, has been surplus to requirements. What a waste, what a profusion, what a cruelty, if you want to give it a human or a spirited name. That's what you have to believe. That's the kind of tinkerer, the kind of capricious, incompetent, tyrant, obviously so much modelled on our human experience of authority. As it's enough to convince me of what I'm now sure of, man did not create God. Men and women created many, many, many gods, and always have since the dawn of our history, and still do. And one of those gods may be true, out of all of them, might be real, or all of them could be false, or all of them could be true. And the overwhelming probability, it seems to me, as the cults that attach to each of them, is that all of them are false, and for the same reason. They are made up by creatures half a chromosome away from being chimpanzees, and I'm afraid to say it shows. Mother Teresa was a fanatic, a fundamentalist, and a fraud. She was not a friend of the poor, as she claimed to be. She was a friend of poverty. Preached it as a good thing, as a gift from God, something to be welcomed along with other kinds of suffering. Wasn't interested in alleviating it. Was a friend of the rich. Took money from the Duvalier family in Haiti, one of the most obscenely bloated dynastic dictatorships in history. Took money from Charles Keating, the man who robbed Americans blind through the Lincoln Savings and Loan. Stolen money. All to build convents in her own name, more than 200 of them around the world, in order to found an order that bore her name. This is not modesty either, nor is it humility. It doesn't exhaust my critique of her either. We all know there is a cure for poverty. It's a rudimentary one. It does work, though. It works everywhere for the same reason. It's colloquially called the empowerment of women. It's the only thing that does work. If you allow women some control over their cycle of reproduction, so that they're not chained by their husbands or by village custom to annual animal-type pregnancies, early death, disease, and so on. If you will free them from that, give them some basic health of that sort, and if you are generous enough to throw in perhaps a handful of seeds and a bit of credit, the whole floor, culturally, socially, medically, economic, of that village will rise. It works every time. Mother Teresa spent her entire life campaigning against that outcome. She said that contraception was equivalent to abortion morally, and abortion was morally equivalent to murder. She was entirely against the only thing that cures poverty. I would say that her preachments led to an enormous increase in the amount of poverty, ignorance, filth, and disease in the world. And I would further add, without embarrassment, that it's off those things that the Roman Catholic Church has always fed and made its living. Otherwise, there would have been no need for the Protestant Revolution, which brings us here today. As I said before, you can be an atheist in anything you like. You can be an atheist in the Marquis de Sade. You can be an atheist and be a great humanist. I mean, most of the missionary work, work done by Médecins Sans Frontières, for example, by Oxfam, by many other people in the stricken parts of the globe which I've visited, done by people who are not doing it to proselytize for their faith. They're not doing it handing out Bibles surreptitiously. They're not doing it for any such reason. They're doing it for its own sake. That's a beautiful humanism, and I admire it. I even think it has a slight superiority, and there's no hidden agenda to it. I've read Mein Kampf, for example, which most people have not, where Hitler says several times, starting very early on, that he's doing God's work in exterminating the Jews. He went on saying that. The Vatican was shown the book. In those days, they would ban any book they didn't like the look of. They were one of the great book banning organizations in the world. They didn't ban the book that was written by the leader who made his first political treaty in Germany with them and their church, and outside Germany between his dictatorship and the Vatican. If you wanted to take your oath, well, you didn't have to want to, you had to, if you were in the German army or in the SS, to take your oath to the Führer, which was compulsory. You took it like this: I swear by Almighty God, undying fealty. Around your belt, if you were a soldier in the Nazi army, you had to wear a buckle that said Gott mit uns, the German for God on our side. Like every other form of totalitarianism and fanaticism, this is religious in itself, and it was not, as it was in some other countries, the Christian right in power, but it was the Christian right subsumed into a party that involved various other terrible mutations too. Why don't you accept this wonderful offer? Why wouldn't you like to meet Shakespeare, for example? I mean, I don't know if you really think that when you die you can be corporeally reassembled and have conversations with authors from previous epochs. It's not necessary that you believe that. in Christian theology, and I have to say it sounds like a complete fairy tale to me. The only reason I want to meet Shakespeare, or might even want to, is because I can meet him any time, because he is immortal in the works he's left behind. If you've read those, meeting the author would almost certainly be a disappointment. But when Socrates was sentenced to death for his philosophical investigations and for blasphemy, for challenging the gods of the city, and he accepted his death, he did say, well, if we are lucky, perhaps I'll be able to hold conversation with other great thinkers and philosophers and doubters too. In other words, that the discussion about what is good, what is beautiful, what is noble, what is pure and what is true could always go on. Why is that important? Why would I like to do that? Because that's the only conversation worth having. And whether it goes on or not after I die, I don't know. But I do know that it's the conversation I want to have while I'm still alive. Which means that to me, the offer of certainty, the offer of complete security, the offer of an impermeable faith that can't give way, is an offer of something not worth having. I want to live my life taking the risk all the time that I don't know anything like enough yet, that I haven't understood enough, that I can't know enough, that I'm always hungrily operating on the margins of a potentially great harvest of future knowledge and wisdom. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'd urge you to look at those of you who tell you, those people who tell you at your age that you're dead till you believe as they do. What a terrible thing to be telling to children. And that you can only live, and that you can only live by accepting an absolute authority. Don't think of that as a gift. Think of it as a poisoned chalice. Push it aside, however tempting it is. Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.